for me, is a phenomenon. I think there's barely somebody who influenced the idea about the modern city, the idea about the social geography of the city, the theory of the city, more than David Harvey. I think you spend your whole life, the idea you spend your whole life by writing bestsellers, from the social justice in the city via the conditions of postmodernity to the history of neoliberalism. All these books became standards in the International Library of Urbanism. So I'm very glad I may announce.
I first should apologize that I'm not really going to talk very much about water. I am going to talk about urbanization. I apologize for that. The other thing I have to apologize for is that I don't have any PowerPoint. But I think actually one of the things I thought in the last couple of days, I think there's a problem with PowerPoint. And the problem is this, that we get so beguiled by all the beautiful images, we forget what the reality is out there. Things get disappeared in the PowerPoint. I didn't see any poor people. I didn't know what's happening to the billions of impoverished people around the world. I didn't see any pictures of slums and slum formation, which is going on in cities. It all got lost. Now, there's a famous saying coined in the 19th century by Lord Acton, which said, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'd like to suggest a modification of that, which you should all think about, which is that power corrupts, PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. My topic is really about something called the right to the city, and it partly comes out of the fact that a lot of political energy these days is put into questions of human rights and notions of rights, and there are many people, NGOs and political movements that actually are very attached to this idea that a politics based on human rights is going to find a way to improve matters around the world. I'm on record as being extremely skeptical about that, even though I think it's perfectly good that we try to get people out of jail who should not be in jail for political reasons. So there is an element of the human rights politics that I would certainly support. But the problem is that, by and large, human rights is cast in individualistic terms and also in terms of private property arrangements and private property rights. And if you take those two rights as foundational, as they are in the UN Charter, then there is absolutely no way that you can come to a very serious criticism of liberalism, neoliberalism, market economies and all the rest of it through a human rights politics. Because you're going to be faced with a situation where the rights of private property and of the profit rate trump all other forms of human rights that you can think of. But there is one way to go here, which is to start to talk about collective rights. And there have been historical movements around collective rights which are extremely powerful and extremely significant. For the last 250 years, the collective struggle over the rights of labour has produced a great deal of transformative politics in our society. I think one of the gifts that the United States gave to the world in the 1960s was the civil rights movement, which actually had global reverberations. And it was a collective movement, and the same thing applied to women's rights. And again, something which is very progressive in the United States and You'll be very surprised that I even defend the United States, but on these matters I do. The rights of handicapped people are far better served in the United States than they are in any other part of the world. And the United States has pioneered in that kind of way. And I think the fact that we may end up with a black person as President of the United States is something which may be quite astonishing and quite unusual. I doubt that any European country would go that far. Imagine somebody of Turkish extraction becoming Chancellor of Germany. Imagine a Maghrebian becoming President of France. Somebody of Pakistani extraction becoming Prime Minister of Britain. These are, I think, important movements when we start to think of them as a collective movement. The collective rights of minorities, the collective rights of indigenous populations, the collective rights of labour, of women, and the like. And the particular collective right I'm interested in talking about today is the right to the city. And I do that for two reasons. One is that 2008 is the 40th anniversary of 1968, and there was a political movement, which wasn't only in Paris, it was in Bangkok, it was in Mexico City, it was in the United States, and the 1968 movement had something about it that was rather special. And around that time, Henri Lefebvre wrote a series of books, one of which was called The Urban Revolution, and the other dealt with the right to the city. And the point he was making was that much of the movement of the 1960s was around the question of the urban. What is a good life in the city? What's it about? How can urban social movements express themselves alongside the labour movement to try to command the urban environment, urban qualities of life? But then it so happens, contemporaneously right now, there are several movements around the world that are starting to use the term the right to the city. And these are people who've never read Lefebvre, had no idea that he ever existed, and frankly couldn't care less. But what they're doing is they're beginning to say there are lots of particular rights in particular cities, anti-gentrification, rights around urban health, women's rights, rights of gays, rights of youth, rights of employment. And these particular rights have been struggled over for long enough that there has to be some collective way of putting them all together. And now in the United States there is a right to the city movement, which is a national movement. We have a local chapter in New York, with which I'm working some of the time. And it seems like a good idea to talk about the right to the city, particularly in the present conjuncture, and I'll explain why as we go on. Now, when we talk about the right to the city, it's important to first off start off with some idea as to exactly what this might mean. And I always go back to a definition of the city by this urban sociologist in Chicago in the 1920s, Robert Park, when he said that cities are our most sophisticated attempt to create a world more after our heart's desire. But in creating that world, we've created a world in which we are henceforth condemned to live. And in adapting to that new world we have created, we have, without even really thinking it through very carefully, actually recreated ourselves. This puts, if you like, a very serious connection between the idea of changing the city and changing ourselves.